Hello and welcome to Parents Guide to Games. Before we get started, if you could please subscribe. Here are the games week of November 10th, 2020. Now today is a special day because the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S are launching today. Also in the video, so there will be some changes. You'll hear Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5, still Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. I did write also that if it's Xbox Series S or X and Xbox One, I only did the Series X since it's the highest, and same thing with PlayStation when that comes up. So just a little correction if you see it and you're like, hey, they released an Xbox One. Instead of doing a huge long list of them, if they did the Xbox Series X, it's more than likely to get the Xbox One for a while. I'll just let you know that. The first game on our list is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is coming out on Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, Google Stadia, and PC. The rating is mature. The content descriptions: blood and gore, intense violence, partial nudity, sexual themes, strong language, use of drugs and alcohol. This is an action-adventure game in which players assume the role of a Viking mercenary who travels through England to forge alliances, lead raids, and defeat rival clans and rulers. Players explore open-world environments, perform missions, use stealth to discreetly kill human targets. Players also use swords, axes, arrows, and siege weapons to kill multiple enemies in frantic melee-style combat. Combat is highlighted by screams of pain and frequent blood splatter effects. Some weapons allow players to decapitate enemies. Zoom-in sequences depict victims' bones, organs, and muscles getting damaged by the player's blades. The game contains some sexual material, a mission tracking place in a brothel, topless women straddling men, a character agreeing to lay with a man. A handful of sequences depict screen distortion, discoloration, and impaired movements after the player's character consumes mushroom or inhales mushroom-based fumes. Player characters can also engage in drinking contests. Later sequences depict the character stumbling as the screen tilts and blurs. Swear words appear in the dialogue. Next up is Fuser. This is coming out PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and PC. The rating is teen. The content descriptions: mild lyrics, mild suggestive themes. This is a rhythm-based game in which players assume the role of a DJ at a large music concert. Players mix tracks from different records to create unique mixes to earn points and crowd adoration. Some song lyrics contain swear words as well as suggestive references. Players can customize their DJ character with various outfits. Some tank tops reveal the sides of characters' breasts. Now let's take a look at Maneater. This is coming on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series S. The rating is mature. The content descriptions: blood and gore, drug references, intense violence, mature humor, and mild language. This is an action simulation game in which players control a shark through a story-based hunting campaigns and evolution cycles. From a third-person perspective, players explore oceans, eat sea creatures, and attack boats and humans. The player's shark attacks by diving, biting, and/or slashing his tail at prey, resulting in large splatters of mists of blood. Some areas prompt players to kill a certain number of beachgoers or hunters in order to progress. Other levels contain one-on-one battles against rival sharks. Cutscenes also depict intense acts of violence: a shark leaping into a boat to bite off a man's arm, a shark biting off a man's leg, a bloodied man stabbing a shark while being chewed on. Voiceovers and dialogue contain some mature humor, including sexual material. Texts include references to drugs as heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and fentanyl. The game contains several partially bleeding censored swear words. Next up is Shuga, Roll of Rice and Ruin. This is coming out PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. The rating is teen. The content descriptions: fantasy violence, mild blood, and use of alcohol. This is an action game in which players assume the role of a harvest goddess vanished to an island overrun by monsters. Players tend to a rice farm and explore side-scrolling island environments to battle various demons. Players use hammers, swords, and sickles to defeat fantasy creatures in frantic melee-style combat. Some attacks are accompanied by impact sound, cries of pain, and brief blood effects. The game depicts a drunk character with an audible hic in his speech. One prolonged sequence depicts a young character discussing alcohol. Dialogue references alcohol throughout the game. Now let's dive into the Falconer. This is coming out on Xbox Series X and PC. The rating is teen. The content descriptions: blood and fantasy violence. This is an action-adventure game in which players control large falcon-like creatures throughout aerial combat missions. From a third-person perspective, players fly above islands, complete delivery and combat missions, and use weapons and special abilities to shoot down enemies riding birds, and sea creatures. Combat can be frantic with frequent gunfire, radio chatter, and explosions. A handful of missions involve dramatic bombing runs on specific targets. When a player Falcon gets hit during combat, small droplets of blood may appear. Next up is Yakuza Like a Dragon. This is coming on Xbox Series X, PlayStation 4, and PC. The rating is mature. The content descriptors are blood, intense violence, sexual themes, strong language, and use of alcohol. This is an action role-playing game in which players follow a story of a low-level Yakuza involving a feud between rival clans. Players perform quests, level up combat skills, and fight enemy clans in turn-based combat. Players select attack moves and spells from a menu before watching characters punch, kick, and throw at each other. Spells and special moves include Blast of Fire and over-the-top assists. Finishing moves can trigger slow-motion effects and cameras zooming in on a highlighted violent axe. Blood effects accompany several moves. Cutscenes also depict intense acts of violence. A man poked out the eye of a rival with his thumb, a character shot in the head, a bound man beaten with pipes and bats. Blood effects sometimes embellish these acts. The game contains some sexual material, characters discussing selling porn to underage kids, a special move depicting a woman in lingerie tying up a targeted enemy, characters cleaning up soiled tissues in a brothel. During the course of the game, players can visit bars to order alcoholic drinks, regaining health during the battles. Characters can sometimes seen stumbling and slurring their speech when drunk. Swear words appear in the dialogue. Now let's take a look at Astro's Playroom. This is coming on PlayStation 5. The rating is everyone 10 and up. The content descriptors are fantasy violence. This is an action platformer in which players control a robot as it traverses platforms, breaks objects, and defeats enemy robots. While enemies clash, smash, and shoot projectiles at Astro, players can dispatch them via melee and spin attacks, resulting in robots bursting into fragments and coins. Some sequences, players can use a gun-like blaster that shoot colored balls at frantic pace. Players also use a bow and arrow to defeat enemies, resulting in mild explosions. One game mode allows players to shoot other Astro-type robots with blasters in order to distribute or stall opponents from completing an objective. Let's break down Just Dance 2021. This is coming on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, Nintendo Switch, and Google Stadia. The rating is everyone. The content descriptions are mild lyrics. This is a rhythm and dance simulation game in which players perform choreographed routines by following the movements of on-screen characters. Players score points by accurately moving their bodies in time to the music and scrolling indicators. Some songs contain the words damn and hell and references to suggestive material. Now we'll take a look at Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. This is coming on PlayStation 5. The rating is teen. The content descriptors is blood, drug references, language, and violence. This is an action game in which players assume the role of Miles Morales, aka Spider-Man, as he battles underground gangs and villains while attempting to save New York City from attacks. From a third-person's perspective, players fight crime, swing around buildings, and engage in melee combat with enemies. Characters mostly punch, kick, and throw each other during fights. Miles can also use special electric-based attacks. Some enemies use pistols and machine guns during fights. Gunshots result in small splashes of blood when the characters are hit. Cutscenes depict additional acts of violence, a character beaten with a club while tied to a chair, an explosion that kills a character, a handful of lines in the dialogue references running and dealing drugs. Swear words appear in the dialogue. Next up is Sackboy A Big Adventure. This is coming on PlayStation 5. The rating is everyone. The content descriptions, mild cartoon violence, mild lyrics. This is a 3D adventure platformer in which players assume the role of Sackboy as he explores Craft World and attempt to rescue Sackfolk from a villain. Players traverse the platform environments and collect various items and battle whimsical enemies. Players can defeat enemies by jumping on their heads, smashing them, or pulling their tails. Enemies sometimes are stunned with dizzying stars or disappear in a cloud of confetti and smoke. One song contains the word damn. Now let's take a look at The Pathless. This is coming on PlayStation 5 and PC. The rating is everyone 10 and up. The content descriptions is fantasy violence. This is an action-adventure game in which players assume the role of a master archer trying to dispel a dark curse. As players explore a mysterious land, they forge a bond with an eagle companion, traverse landscapes, and solve puzzles, and engage in a handful of boss battles with fantasy creatures. Boss battles can be frantic with players shooting arrows and enemies spewing fireballs, energy blasts, and lava. Combat is highlighted by impact sound, cries of pain, and screen shaking effects. Now your teenager's favorite game, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. This is coming out on PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC. The rating is mature. The content descriptions, blood and gore, drug references, intense violence, strong language, suggestive themes. This is a first-person shooter set during the Cold War in which players explore locations in Europe and Asia while engaging in combat and infiltration missions. Players use pistols, machine guns, assault rifles, and explosives to kill hostile forces in frantic combat. Battles are highlighted by realistic gunfire, blood splatter effects, and cries of pain. In addition to ranged combat, players get an ability to stab or pistol whip enemies close up or use them as human shields. Some weapons cause characters to explode into bloody chunks of flesh. A zombie mode also depicts decapitations and dismemberment, as players use bladed weapons and guns to kill hordes of undead soldiers and creatures. In this setting, flyers with the word Peep Show and XXX can be seen alongside a picture of women in lingerie. A red light district storefront is depicted with a neon sign that reads XXX. During one mission, players infiltrate a drug cartel. Drug packaging and piles of white powder can be seen in the warehouse. Swear words appear in the dialogue. And the last game on today's list is Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. This is coming on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. The rating is everyone turning up. Content descriptions, fantasy violence, and mild language. This is a rhythm-based game in which players help characters battle through worlds of Kingdom Hearts series. On a scrolling track, players time button presses with musical cues in order to attack, dodge, and use magic against fantasy enemies. Animated sequences sometimes depict characters using keyblades to attack enemies in one-on-one combat. A handful of sequences involve characters being impaled, depicted off-screen or obscured by bright flashes of light. One song contains the word damned. Big shout out to bensound.com for the music. Please follow Parents Guide to Games on Facebook at Parents Guide to Games, on Twitter at ParentsG2G, and email any questions or comments to parentsg2g@gmail.com. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe.